Worthless gutter trash like you belongs in a fucking dumpster, not a federal courthouse. Those 11 words, spat with the kind of venom that curdles your soul, would echo in the mind of Officer Vincent O'Malley for the rest of his miserable life, playing on a loop in the cold, dark silence of his future. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Ever had someone look at you and, in a single instant, decide your entire worth based on nothing more than their own twisted prejudice? Now, imagine that person has a badge, a gun, and the full weight of the law behind them. What you are about to witness is the most brutal, satisfying, and awe-inspiring story of instant karma you will ever see. So, before we even dive in, do me a favor. Smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the takedown you're about to see is so legendary, you'll want to watch it twice. It started on a sweltering Tuesday morning in Charleston, South Carolina. Judge Evelyn Reed, dressed in a simple but elegant linen pantsuit, approached the J. Waddy's Waring Judicial Center. In her hand, she carried a worn leather briefcase, its contents holding the fates of a dozen people she would preside over that day. At 47, she had a presence that commanded respect. But in her civilian clothes, without the black robes that acted as her armor, she was just another woman walking to work. To Officer Vinnie O'Malley, she was less than that. He stood guard at the courthouse steps, a bulldog of a man whose neck was thicker than his sense of decency. He saw a black woman in an expensive suit approaching a federal building, and his brain, poisoned by years of bigotry and unchecked power, short-circuited. To him, she couldn't possibly belong here. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in," he muttered to his partner, Deputy Cardenas, who snickered in agreement. O'Malley blocked her path, puffing out his chest and sneering down at her with a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescending sarcasm. "I'm just heading into work, officer," Evelyn replied calmly, though a familiar knot of tension tightened in her stomach. "Work?" O'Malley scoffed, looking her up and down. "This ain't the welfare office, sweetheart. This is a federal courthouse. Now turn around before you get yourself in real trouble." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "I assure you, I have legitimate business here. Now if you'll excuse me." She made a move to step around him, and that's when O'Malley's fragile ego shattered. The idea that this woman would defy him was more than he could bear. His open palm, thick and calloused, cracked against her face with a sound like a gunshot. Her head snapped sideways with such force that for a moment the world was a blur of spinning concrete and blue sky. The expensive briefcase flew from her grasp, and years of legal work, briefs, motions, judicial orders, scattered like autumn leaves across the courthouse steps. Before she could even register the searing pain in her cheek, O'Malley grabbed her by the throat, his fingers digging into her skin, and slammed her back against the cold, unyielding stone of the courthouse wall. The impact knocked the wind out of her, and black spots danced in her vision. He leaned in close, his breath hot and foul with the smell of stale coffee and cigarettes. "Worthless gutter trash like you belongs in a fucking dumpster, not a federal courthouse." He twisted her arms behind her back with practiced brutality, the metal teeth of the handcuffs biting deep into her wrists. Other officers, including Cardenas and a younger deputy named Miller, began to gather around. They didn't intervene. They didn't help. They laughed. They pulled out their phones and started recording, capturing the humiliation for their own sick amusement. Evelyn's jaw throbbed, a deep, pulsating ache that radiated through her entire skull. But through the pain, through the degradation, her eyes remained locked on the large bronze nameplate mounted above the courthouse entrance, a nameplate she passed every single day. The Honorable Judge Evelyn M. Reed, presiding. She was less than 50 feet from her own courtroom, being brutalized, humiliated, and arrested by the very system she had sworn an oath to uphold. And in that moment, a cold, diamond-hard resolve formed in her heart. Officer O'Malley thought he was teaching a lesson to some woman he deemed worthless. He had no idea he had just signed his own death warrant. He was a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet. Have you ever seen karma delivered so swiftly and so completely that it leaves you breathless? Inside the courtroom, O'Malley straightened his uniform, a smug grin plastered on his face. He had done this dance 100 times before. Spin the story, control the narrative, paint himself as the hero cop staring down the dangers of the street. The system was designed to believe cops over criminals, especially when those criminals looked like Evelyn Reed. "Your Honor," O'Malley began, his voice a practiced, steady baritone. He was addressing the temporary magistrate, Judge Albright, a pale, bird-like man in his late 60s who was filling in for the day. "I was conducting routine security protocols at the main entrance when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security." He gestured dramatically toward Evelyn, who now sat at the defendant's table, cuffed and bruised, a deep purple bloom already spreading across her left cheek. "The defendant was acting erratically, Your Honor. She refused to provide any identification and became increasingly agitated and belligerent when I asked her to comply with standard security procedures." Judge Albright, a man who saw the world in simple shades of black and blue, nodded approvingly. "And what, specifically, did you observe, Officer O'Malley?" "Well, sir, her attire was inappropriate for court proceedings. Very flashy. She was carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents." O'Malley's eyes gleamed as he warmed to his fabrication, the lies flowing from him as easily as breath. "When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive, using profanity, making threats against me and my family. It was a very volatile situation." From the gallery, Deputies Cardenas and Miller exchanged knowing smirks. They had heard Vinny spin these tales dozens of times. Different faces, different days, same old script. "She kept screaming about being someone important," O'Malley continued, his voice dripping with disdain as he layered on another lie. "These people, they always do that. They claim to be lawyers, judges, senators. Anything to try and get out of taking responsibility for their actions. I've seen this playbook before, Your Honor. It's a classic manipulation tactic." Judge Albright leaned forward, utterly captivated. "Did she attempt to flee or resist arrest, officer?" "Absolutely, Your Honor. The defendant became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody for her own safety and the safety of the public." O'Malley held up his hands, as if to show invisible wounds. "I was forced to use the minimum necessary force to de-escalate the situation and ensure public safety. I showed remarkable restraint, all things considered." The courthouse stenographer's fingers flew across her machine, a silent, whirring machine capturing every syllable of his perjury for posterity. In the back row, a young law clerk, a recent graduate named Sarah, frowned deeply. Something about the woman at the defendant's table, her posture, her quiet dignity, even in cuffs, was nagging at her. "Deputy Cardenas," the prosecutor, a harried woman named Sandra Walsh, called out. "Can you corroborate Officer O'Malley's testimony?" Cardenas stood, his uniform pressed to military perfection. "Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire incident. The defendant was clearly trying to circumvent our security protocols. Officer O'Malley handled the situation with the utmost professionalism and courage." "And the alleged assault?" Judge Albright inquired, peering over his glasses. O'Malley's jaw tightened. "Your Honor, as I stated, I used only the force necessary to subdue an aggressive, non-compliant individual who posed a clear threat to courthouse security. The defendant's injuries, if any, are a direct result of her own violent resistance to lawful commands." He pulled out his personal phone, the one he'd used to film her humiliation. "I have partial footage here, Your Honor, though unfortunately my department-issued body cam malfunctioned this morning. A battery issue." The lie rolled off his tongue like honey. How convenient. "How convenient?" Evelyn murmured, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a razor. "I'm sorry?" Judge Albright raised an eyebrow, annoyed by the interruption. "Nothing, Your Honor," she replied calmly, her eyes blazing with a controlled fury that could have melted steel. O'Malley pressed his advantage. "What we're seeing here is a classic case of someone playing the victim card after being caught breaking the law. She was trespassing on government property, carrying suspicious documents, and when confronted with her criminal behavior, she immediately cried discrimination. It's a sad, cynical ploy." The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, nodded sympathetically. Officer O'Malley, in your 15 years of service, have you encountered similar situations? Unfortunately, yes. All the time. There's a pattern with certain individuals. They believe they're above the law, that the rules don't apply to them. And they use these baseless accusations of racism as a shield to deflect from their own criminal behavior. O'Malley's voice rose with righteous indignation. It's honestly insulting to the real victims of discrimination out there. Several people in the gallery, mostly white courthouse employees, nodded in solemn agreement. They had heard these stories on the news, seen these narratives play out on social media. It felt familiar, comfortable, true. The defendant claims she was going to work, O'Malley said, making sarcastic air quotes. But she couldn't provide any employment verification, no ID, no legitimate reason for being in a restricted area of the courthouse. Deputy Miller, the third officer, stepped forward, eager to get in on the action. If I may add, Your Honor, the defendant was carrying what appeared to be confidential legal documents. We have reason to suspect she may have been involved in some kind of identity theft or fraud scheme. Judge Albright looked intrigued. A fraud scheme? Yes, sir. O'Malley jumped back in, sensing victory. These documents had judicial letterhead, case numbers, sensitive information. No legitimate citizen would have access to materials like this. We believe she may have been planning to impersonate court personnel to gain access to sensitive areas. The irony was so thick, it was almost suffocating. But O'Malley, blinded by his own arrogance, pressed on, completely oblivious to the elaborate trap he was setting for himself. In my professional opinion, he concluded, puffing out his chest one last time, this is simply another case of someone trying to game the system. She knows if she can make this about race, about alleged police brutality, she can distract from her actual crimes. It's a calculated manipulation of public sympathy. He turned and faced Evelyn directly, his eyes cold and full of contempt. These people think they can just waltz into any building, any courtroom, any space they choose. And when they're stopped, they scream discrimination. Well, not on my watch. Not in my courthouse. The words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Your Honor, Prosecutor Walsh added smoothly, the state recommends we proceed with charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. The defendant's attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue is clearly a desperate and transparent defense strategy. O'Malley allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. This was going exactly as planned. Another case, another win. Another reminder that the system worked just the way it was supposed to. People knew their place, or they learned it the hard way. Furthermore, he added, emboldened by the supportive atmosphere in the room, I want to emphasize that I showed remarkable restraint. The defendant was clearly unstable, possibly under the influence of narcotics. A lesser officer might have been forced to use much more significant force to neutralize the threat. Judge Albright nodded gravely. Your professionalism is noted for the record, Officer O'Malley. In the defendant's chair, Evelyn sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap despite the cold steel of the handcuffs. Her expression remained calm, almost serene. But anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight, dangerous upturn at the corners of her mouth. She was taking meticulous mental notes of every lie, every fabrication, every single detail that would soon unravel not just O'Malley's career, but his entire life. The officer had no idea he was delivering his own eulogy in front of the very person who had the power to bury him. Is there anything else you'd like to add, officer? Judge Albright asked, ready to wrap things up. O'Malley straightened his shoulders, feeling 10 feet tall. Just that incidents like this are a stark reminder of why we need strong law enforcement. Some people only understand authority when it's backed by force. The defendant learned today that actions have consequences. He had no idea how prophetic those words would be. The prosecutor smiled confidently. The state rests its case against this defendant, Your Honor. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of criminal behavior and a dangerous resistance to lawful authority. As O'Malley stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Evelyn's eye one final time. He winked at her, a gesture of complete dominance, of total, unassailable victory. It would be the last moment of triumph in his entire life. "The defendant may now present her statement," Judge Albright announced, his tone suggesting this would be a mere formality before sentencing. Evelyn Reed rose slowly from her chair, the handcuffs clinking softly in the silent courtroom. Despite the ugly bruise on her cheek and the disheveled state of her clothes, she carried herself with an unmistakable, almost regal dignity that made several people in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Thank you, Your Honor." Her voice was clear, controlled, and carried an innate authority that seemed to fill the entire room, silencing the whispers and coughs. "I appreciate the opportunity to address these creative allegations." Judge Albright blinked. Something in her tone was unexpected. It was professional, precise, in a way that didn't match the unhinged criminal O'Malley had just described. "First," she began, her eyes sweeping the courtroom methodically, landing for a brief, cold moment on O'Malley, Cardenas, Miller, and the prosecutor, "I want to clarify several factual inaccuracies in Officer O'Malley's testimony. According to his statement, I was trespassing on government property. However, I was walking on a public sidewalk approaching the main entrance of this courthouse at approximately 8:47 a.m. She turned slightly, addressing Judge Albright directly. "Your Honor, I'm sure you're familiar with the Supreme Court ruling in Perry Education Association v. Perry Local Educators Association, which clearly establishes that public sidewalks, regardless of their proximity to government buildings, are traditional public forums where citizens have a constitutional right to be present." The stenographer's fingers paused mid-stroke. The prosecutor frowned, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. This wasn't the rambling, emotional outburst they'd expected from a cornered suspect. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, her voice as sharp as a scalpel, "Officer O'Malley testified that I was carrying suspicious documents and suggested I was involved in identity theft. I'd like to examine that claim more closely." She gestured with her cuffed hands towards the evidence table where her scattered papers had been collected into a messy pile. "Those documents are indeed authentic legal materials. Specifically, they include pending case files for United States v. Henderson, judicial memoranda regarding sentencing guidelines, and administrative correspondence from the Chief Judge's office, all of which I have legitimate, and I would say unparalleled, access to in my professional capacity." "Professional capacity?" Judge Albright interrupted, intrigued despite himself. "And what exactly is your profession, Miss—" Evelyn paused, a slight knowing smile playing on her lips. "Williams. My name is Evelyn Reed, and I think we'll get to my professional background shortly, Your Honor." A chill, cold and sharp, ran down Vinnie O'Malley's spine. Something was very, very wrong with this picture. "Your Honor, if I may continue," Evelyn said, her voice taking on the familiar cadence of someone completely at home in a courtroom, someone who owned the space around her. "Officer O'Malley also testified that I became verbally aggressive and used profanity. I'd like to address that claim by invoking my Fifth Amendment right to remain silent regarding any statements I may have made during the unprovoked assault." She paused, letting the legal weight of that statement sink in. "However, I will note for the record that any statements I did make were in direct response to being physically assaulted without provocation, without warning, and without any shred of legal justification." The young law clerk in the back row, Sarah, sat bolt upright. That voice, that command of legal terminology, she knew it from somewhere. "Now, regarding the officer's claim that his body cam malfunctioned," Evelyn continued, and now there was steel in her voice. "Your Honor, I'm sure you're aware of the federal rules of evidence, particularly Rule 1006, which allows for the admission of summaries of voluminous recordings. I have every reason to believe that comprehensive, high-definition video and audio evidence of this morning's entire incident exists and will be made available to this court shortly." Judge Albright leaned forward, his earlier boredom completely gone. "What kind of evidence are you referring to?" "Your Honor, this courthouse has an extensive security camera network, including high-definition 4K cameras positioned at 15-foot intervals along the main approach, all of which record on a continuous loop. Additionally, the County Sheriff's Department maintains an automatic, encrypted, cloud-based backup system for all officer body cam footage, regardless of any claimed equipment malfunctions on the local device. The color drained from O'Malley's face. He had completely forgotten about the courthouse security cameras in his rush to build his narrative. "I would like to formally request," Evelyn continued, her voice ringing with authority, "that this court issue an immediate preservation order for all electronic surveillance data from this morning, between the hours of 8:45 a.m. and 9:15 a.m., including but not limited to all courthouse security footage, all body cam backup files from all officers present, and any mobile phone recordings that may have been made by Officers O'Malley, Cardenas, and Miller at the scene." Prosecutor Walsh stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant cannot simply make wild evidentiary demands without proper legal representation." Evelyn turned to face the prosecutor with a look so cold and withering that the woman took an involuntary step back. "Your Honor, pro se defendants have the constitutional right to present evidence in their own defense under the Sixth Amendment. Furthermore, Brady v. Foam, Maryland establishes the prosecution's absolute obligation to preserve and turn over any and all potentially exculpatory evidence. Are you suggesting the state intends to violate my constitutional rights, Counselor?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. This was not how these cases were supposed to go. Judge Albright cleared his throat, suddenly looking very nervous. "Miss Reed, you seem unusually familiar with legal procedure. Do you have formal legal training?" "I have some experience with the judicial system, Your Honor." Evelyn's response was carefully neutral, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked terrifyingly like amusement. She walked, as much as the handcuffs would allow, to the evidence table and gestured toward her scattered belongings. "Your Honor, I'd also like to address Officer O'Malley's characterization of my presence here as suspicious or unauthorized. He claimed I had no identification." She pointed to her wallet, which was in an evidence bag. In that wallet, he would have found my state-issued driver's license, my federal employee ID, and my American Bar Association membership card. Bailiff Marcus Jones, a large, gentle man who had worked in this courthouse for 20 years, suddenly went very still. He was staring at Evelyn, a look of dawning recognition and absolute horror spreading across his face. "Officer O'Malley testified that I claimed to be someone important," Evelyn continued, her voice steady and relentless. "I'd like to clarify that I never made any such claim during our encounter. However, I did attempt to show him my identification, which he refused to even look at before initiating his violent assault." She paused, surveying the now terrified faces in the courtroom. "Your Honor, I have in my possession, despite Officer O'Malley's interference, documentation that will conclusively establish both my identity and my legitimate reason for being at this courthouse this morning." Judge Albright was beginning to look physically ill. "What kind of documentation?" Evelyn reached carefully into the pocket of her blazer, moving slowly and deliberately. She pulled out a small leather credential wallet. "My judicial parking pass, issued by this courthouse's administrative office. My building access card, programmed with entry codes for my judicial chambers, and my official judicial identification." Bailiff Jones shot to his feet, his face as pale as a ghost. He knew that wallet. He saw it every day. "Your Honor," Evelyn said quietly, holding up the wallet so the golden judicial seal was clearly visible even from across the room. "I believe there has been a significant and catastrophic misunderstanding about who exactly Officer O'Malley assaulted this morning." She let the wallet fall open. "Perhaps," she suggested, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone who was used to giving orders in courtrooms, not taking them, "we should recess so that proper identifications can be verified." Judge Albright stared at the credential wallet, then at Evelyn's face, then at Bailiff Jones, who was nodding grimly, his expression a mask of pure terror. Court will recess for 15 minutes, Albright stammered, his voice hoarse. As the gavel fell, Vinnie O'Malley felt his entire world beginning to liquefy and crumble around him. Whatever sick, twisted game he thought he was playing, he was just now beginning to realize that he didn't even understand the rules, and he had just lost. Spectacularly. During the 15-minute recess, the courthouse buzzed with the frantic, nervous energy of a kicked beehive. In a small holding room adjacent to the courtroom, Evelyn sat calmly while bailiff Marcus Jones fumbled with the handcuff keys, his large hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. "Judge Reed," he whispered, his voice thick with horror and shame. "Jesus Christ, Judge Reed, I am so sorry. I didn't recognize you in your street clothes, and when they brought you in like that, I just—" "It's all right, Marcus," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but firm as she rubbed her bruised wrists. "You weren't part of this, but I need you to do something for me now. And I need you to do it quickly and quietly. Anything, Your Honor, anything at all. I need you to go to my chambers. Bring me my judicial robes, the black ones with the gold trim. And Marcus," she looked him directly in the eye, her gaze steady and intense. "Bring my gavel, too. The engraved one from my swearing-in ceremony." Marcus nodded vigorously and hurried out, leaving Evelyn alone with her thoughts. She closed her eyes and took a deep, centering breath, the way she had learned to do during her 2 decades on the bench. This morning, she had been Judge Evelyn M. Reed, respected jurist, a protector of constitutional rights, a guardian of justice. In the span of 15 minutes, she had been transformed into a victim, a defendant, a woman in handcuffs facing a litany of trumped-up charges. But now, it was time to reclaim what was hers. Her phone, confiscated during the arrest but now returned by a terrified-looking Marcus, buzzed incessantly with missed calls and frantic messages. Her clerk, Janet Morrison, was in a full-blown panic. "Judge Reed, where are you? The Peterson hearing is in 30 minutes. Your Honor, the attorneys are here asking about delays. Should I reschedule?" "Judge Reed, please call me back. There are rumors flying around that something happened on the courthouse steps." Evelyn typed back quickly, her fingers flying across the screen. "Janet, tell the Peterson attorneys we'll reschedule. Something more important has come up. Clear my entire afternoon calendar. Now." She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Chief Judge Diane Holloway, the formidable administrative head of the entire judicial district. "Diane, it's Evelyn." "Evelyn, thank God. We heard there was some kind of incident. Are you all right?" "I've been better, Diane. Listen to me. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it without asking any questions. Not yet." "Of course, whatever you need." "I need you to contact the courthouse IT and security departments immediately. Tell them to preserve and make multiple redundant copies of all surveillance footage from this morning, between 8:45 and 9:15 a.m. All cameras, all angles, interior and exterior. And, Diane, make sure those copies are stored in different secure locations, off-site if possible." There was a tense pause on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, what in God's name happened this morning?" "A police officer named Vincent O'Malley just spent the last hour testifying under oath about how he heroically subdued a dangerous, trespassing criminal on courthouse property." Evelyn's voice was steady as a rock, but there was an edge to it that Chief Judge Holloway had never heard before. "And the dangerous criminal, Diane, it was me, on my way to work. He didn't just arrest me. He assaulted me in front of this courthouse, called me gutter trash, and told me I belonged in a dumpster." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds, a void filled with unspoken fury. "Jesus Christ, Evelyn. What do you need? Should I call the FBI? The Attorney General's office?" "Not yet. Right now, I need those recordings secured beyond any possibility of being lost or erased. And I need you to make some phone calls. I want every single case Officer Vincent O'Malley has testified in over the past 5 years pulled and flagged for immediate review. Every single one. Consider it done. But Evelyn, you can't handle this case yourself. It's a massive conflict of interest. Oh, I'm not going to be the judge in this case, Diane. I'm going to be the star witness. But first," Evelyn's voice turned to ice, "in about 10 minutes, I'm going to walk back into that courtroom wearing my judicial robes. Officer O'Malley is going to learn exactly who he assaulted this morning. And more importantly, he's going to learn who has the power to ensure he faces the consequences for every single one of his actions." Marcus returned, carrying a garment bag and a small, polished wooden box. "Your robes, Your Honor, and your gavel." Evelyn stood and unzipped the garment bag, revealing the flowing black judicial robes that had been her uniform and her armor for over 2 decades. As she slipped them on, she felt the transformation begin. The heavy fabric settled on her shoulders like a mantle of authority. Each fold and crease was a reminder of the power she wielded, the sacred oaths she had taken, the justice she was sworn to protect and deliver. She opened the wooden box and lifted out her ceremonial gavel, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand. Engraved on its golden band were the words, Justitia non novit patrem nec matrem, solam veritatem spectat. Justice knows no father nor mother. It beholds the truth alone. Marcus, she said, adjusting her robes, when we return to that courtroom, I want you to announce me properly. Yes, Your Honor. How would you like to be announced? Evelyn Reed straightened to her full height, her posture immaculate, every inch the federal judge she had been for 23 years. The Honorable Judge Evelyn M. Reed, presiding. She glanced at herself in the small mirror on the holding room wall. The ugly bruise on her cheek was still visible, a stark, violet mark against her brown skin. But now it served a different purpose. It wasn't just evidence of O'Malley's brutality. It was a symbol of how far the system had fallen, and how completely, and how painfully it was about to be restored. When court resumes, she said to Marcus, her voice a low, dangerous promise, Officer O'Malley is going to learn what justice really means. All rise! Bailiff Marcus Jones's voice boomed through the courtroom with a newfound authority that made everyone, cops, lawyers, clerks, and spectators, snap to attention. But what happened next would be seared into their memories for the rest of their lives. This court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Evelyn M. Reed, presiding. The words hit the courtroom like a physical blow. Officer Vinnie O'Malley, who had been leaning casually against the prosecutor's table, joking with Cardenas, went rigid, his face instantly turning the color of ash. Judge Albright, still seated in what he now realized with dawning horror was not his chair, turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for corpses. The prosecutor's mouth fell open in a silent, horrified gasp. Judge Evelyn Reed entered through the judge's chamber door, the one that had been locked to her just an hour before. She wore her full judicial robes, the gold trim catching the overhead lights. She moved with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who had walked this path thousands of times before, someone who owned this space. In her right hand, she carried her ceremonial gavel. The silence was absolute. Not a single person dared to breathe. She took her place behind the bench, her bench, and sat down slowly, deliberately. Her eyes, cold and hard as obsidian, swept the courtroom, taking in every shocked face, every dropped jaw, every single person who was finally, terrifyingly, beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Officer O'Malley, she said quietly. Her voice, amplified by the courtroom's acoustics, carried the full, crushing weight of judicial authority. You may remain standing. O'Malley looked like he was about to vomit. His face had cycled from red to white to a sickly green in the span of 30 seconds. Your Honor, Judge Albright stammered, scrambling to his feet. I mean to say... Judge Albright, Evelyn interrupted, her tone crisp but not unkind. Thank you for managing my courtroom during my unexpected and unavoidable delay. You may return to your own docket now. I will handle this matter from here. Albright practically fled from the courtroom, his robes billowing behind him as if he were being chased by the hounds of hell. Evelyn turned her undivided attention back to O'Malley, who was now visibly shaking, his legs trembling so hard it was a miracle he was still upright. Officer O'Malley, approximately 2 hours ago, you testified under oath in this courtroom. Do you recall your testimony? O'Malley couldn't form words. His tongue felt thick and useless in his mouth. Let me refresh your memory, Evelyn continued, her voice dangerously calm. You stated, and I quote, these people always claim to be lawyers, judges, senators, anything to avoid accountability. Do you remember saying that? O'Malley managed a weak, pathetic nod. You also stated that I was, and again I quote, another entitled activist looking for a payday, and that you had seen, quote, this playbook before. Is that an accurate recollection of your sworn testimony? The courtroom was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. And perhaps most memorably, Evelyn's voice grew colder, harder. You stated that people like me need to learn that, quote, actions have consequences. Do you recall offering that particular piece of wisdom, officer? O'Malley's legs finally gave out. He grabbed the edge of the prosecutor's table to keep from collapsing. Evelyn reached under her bench and pulled out a tablet computer, the screen already glowing. Officer O'Malley, I'd like to show you some evidence that has just been brought to my attention by the Chief Judge's office. She turned the tablet screen toward the stunned courtroom. On it was crystal-clear, multi-angle security camera footage from the courthouse steps. This is footage from courthouse security camera number 7, which has an unobstructed 4K view of the main entrance. Her finger touched the screen, and the video began to play. The courtroom watched in shared, horrified silence as the events of the morning unfolded. There was Evelyn, walking calmly toward the courthouse. There was O'Malley, blocking her path. And then his voice, clear as day, captured by the camera's sensitive microphone, filled the courtroom. Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in. Several people in the gallery gasped audibly. The video continued, showing O'Malley's unprovoked, brutal assault in vivid, sickening detail. The slap that snapped Evelyn's head to the side, the brutal grab of her throat, the slam against the wall, the handcuffs. But the most damning moment, the one that sealed his fate, was yet to come. Worthless gutter trash like you belongs in a fucking dumpster, not a federal courthouse. O'Malley's own words, spoken with such raw venom and hatred, echoed through the hallowed halls of his own courthouse. Several jurors from other cases who had been waiting in the gallery stood up and walked out in disgust. Officer O'Malley, Evelyn said, pausing the video, do you see any verbal aggression from the defendant in this footage? Any profanity? Any threats? O'Malley remained silent, his career, his life, disintegrating before his very eyes. Now, Evelyn continued relentlessly, let's examine your claim that your body cam malfunctioned. She swiped to a new video file. This is backup footage from your own body cam, automatically uploaded to the county's encrypted cloud storage system every 60 seconds, a system you apparently forgot existed. The new video began playing, and O'Malley's voice once again filled the courtroom, but this time it was even worse. This was the unedited director's cut. Look at this uppity bitch thinking she can just waltz into my courthouse. These people need to learn their place. Time to teach another one a lesson. The prosecutor, Sandra Walsh, was frantically gathering her papers, trying to create as much physical distance as possible from the catastrophe unfolding next to her. But Evelyn wasn't finished with her, or with his partners. Deputy Cardenas, Deputy Miller, she called out, her voice cracking like a whip. You both testified under oath that Officer O'Malley handled this situation with utmost professionalism. Would either of you like to revise those statements now, under penalty of perjury? Both officers were already edging toward the exit, their faces sheet white with terror. And here, Evelyn said, advancing the video to show the assault from O'Malley's own first-person perspective, we can see the exact moment when Officer O'Malley committed felony assault against a federal judge. She let those last two words hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. Federal. Judge. O'Malley's knees finally buckled. He collapsed into the prosecutor's chair. But wait, Evelyn said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than her anger. There's more. She pulled up a new file on her tablet. This is audio from Deputy Miller's body cam, which was apparently functioning perfectly this morning. A new voice filled the courtroom. Miller's voice, speaking to Cardenas while O'Malley was assaulting Evelyn. Dude, Vinny's really going off on this one. You think she's actually somebody important like she keeps saying? Cardenas's voice responded, followed by a snicker. Nah, man. Look at her. Vinny knows what he's doing. Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system. Then came the sound of more laughter from the officers as they watched their colleague brutalize a sitting federal judge. The few remaining spectators in the gallery were staring at the three officers with expressions of undisguised revulsion. Officer O'Malley, Evelyn said, setting down her tablet with a soft click. You asked me earlier if I had any employment verification. Well, I do. She gestured to the Great Seal of the United States mounted on the wall behind her bench, then to her nameplate, then to the official oil-painted portrait of her that hung in the courthouse lobby. I have been the presiding judge of this courthouse for 23 years, Officer O'Malley. Every case you've ever testified in, every warrant you've ever requested, every search you've ever conducted in this jurisdiction has been under my ultimate authority. O'Malley finally found his voice, though it came out as a pathetic, strangled whisper. Your Honor, I didn't know. You didn't know? Evelyn repeated slowly, letting the pathetic excuse hang in the air before dissecting it. You didn't know, because you didn't bother to look. You saw a black woman, and you made assumptions. You saw someone you thought was powerless, and you decided to abuse your power. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. But Officer O'Malley, there's something else you didn't know. The courtroom held its breath. For the past 6 months, my office has been conducting a joint investigation with the FBI's Civil Rights Division into a pattern of misconduct, racial bias, and excessive force within the Charleston Police Department. O'Malley's face went completely white. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. This morning's incident wasn't random, Officer O'Malley. You have been under federal investigation for months, and today, you just gift-wrapped and hand-delivered the most perfect, irrefutable, and damning piece of evidence that we could have ever hoped for. She lifted her gavel and held it in front of her. Officer O'Malley, you said that actions have consequences. You were absolutely right about that. She brought the gavel down with a sound like a crack of thunder. Court will recess while I consider the appropriate charges to be filed against you, Deputy Cardenas and Deputy Miller. O'Malley didn't just collapse into a chair this time. He fell to the floor, a broken, whimpering mess. His career, his reputation, and his freedom were now hanging by the thinnest of threads, and Judge Evelyn Reed was holding the scissors. When court resumed 20 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely transformed. Word had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Lawyers, clerks, bailiffs, and court reporters had quietly filed into the gallery, drawn by whispers of the most spectacular courtroom reversal in the building's history. It was standing room only. O'Malley sat slumped in what was now undeniably the defendant's chair. His uniform was wrinkled, his face ashen and tear-streaked. His new attorney, a nervous public defender named Michael Carter, who had been hastily summoned, kept shooting worried glances between his catatonic client and the judge's bench. Judge Evelyn Reed returned to her bench with the same measured dignity she had displayed thousands of times before. But now, every eye in the room saw her differently. This wasn't just any judge. This was the woman who had been brutally assaulted by the man now trembling before her. She was both victim and arbiter, a living embodiment of the justice system's failure and its only hope for redemption. Officer O'Malley, she began, her voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a cold, surgical precision. Before we proceed with the serious criminal charges you and your colleagues now face, I believe this court, and everyone present, deserves to understand exactly who you assaulted this morning. She stood, moving from behind the bench to address the packed courtroom directly, as if they were her jury. My name is Judge Evelyn M. Reed. I have served as the presiding judge of this United States District Court for 23 years. I was appointed to this position by President Clinton in the year 2000, and I was confirmed by the United States Senate with a unanimous bipartisan vote. Her voice grew stronger with each word, a crescendo of accomplishment and authority. I graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School, where I was the first black woman to serve as editor-in-chief of the Harvard Law Review. Before my appointment to the bench, I served for 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. O'Malley's attorney was frantically scribbling notes, likely calculating just how many centuries in federal prison his client was facing. During my tenure as a federal prosecutor, I specialized in cases involving police misconduct, civil rights violations, and institutional racism. I successfully prosecuted 47 cases against law enforcement officers who abused their authority and violated their oath. She paused, letting that number sink into the silent room. In my 23 years on this bench, I have presided over more than 15,000 cases. I have sentenced hundreds of defendants, from petty thieves to murderers. I have seen every type of criminal behavior, every excuse, every justification. Judge Reed walked slowly, deliberately, closer to where O'Malley sat cowering. But in all my years of service, Officer O'Malley, I have never, not once, encountered such a perfect, pristine, and pathetic example of everything that is wrong with policing in America. The packed courtroom was silent, except for the sound of O'Malley's ragged, panicked breathing. You see, Officer O'Malley, when you called me gutter trash and a filthy animal, when you told me I belonged in a dumpster, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, you weren't just assaulting a random citizen. She returned to her position behind the bench, reclaiming her seat of power. You were assaulting the one person in this entire state who has dedicated her entire professional life to ensuring that officers exactly like you are held accountable for their actions. Judge Reed opened a thick file that a clerk had placed on her bench. This file contains detailed records of every case you've testified in over the past 5 years. 43 cases, Officer O'Malley. 43 times you've stood in this very courtroom and sworn an oath to tell the truth. She flipped through several pages. 28 of those cases involved defendants who were people of color. In 26 of those cases, you were the sole arresting officer. And in every single one, Officer O'Malley, you described the defendants using remarkably similar language to what you used with me this morning. O'Malley's face had gone from white to a sickly, mottled gray. Acting erratically, refusing to comply, becoming aggressive, threatening officer safety. The same words, the same narrative, the same lies, over and over and over again. Judge Reed closed the file with a sharp, final snap. But here's what you didn't know, Officer O'Malley. That joint investigation I mentioned, with the FBI and the Department of Justice? It wasn't a general inquiry into the department. It was an investigation focused specifically on you. The public defender stopped writing and simply stared at his client with an expression of profound pity. Your name, Officer O'Malley, has been at the top of a federal watch list for 18 months. You have been under surveillance. Your communications have been monitored. Your arrest patterns have been analyzed by the top statisticians at the DOJ. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And this morning, Officer O'Malley, you provided us with the most perfect, unambiguous, undeniable evidence of criminal civil rights violations that any prosecutor could ever hope for. You provided it on a silver platter. Judge Reed lifted her gavel. You assaulted a federal judge while she was performing her official duties. You did so based explicitly on racial animus, as evidenced by your own recorded statements. You then committed perjury when you lied, repeatedly and egregiously, under oath about the circumstances of that assault. The gavel hovered in the air like a guillotine. Officer O'Malley, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, let me tell you exactly what my place is. Her voice filled the courtroom with quiet, unshakable authority. My place is on this bench, in this courtroom, ensuring that justice is served. My place is holding people like you accountable when you betray the power we, the people, have entrusted to you. The gavel came down once, a sharp, deafening crack. My place, Officer O'Malley, is making damn sure that what you did to me this morning is the last act of racial violence you will ever commit as a police officer. O'Malley finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman. He had assaulted justice itself. And justice was about to hit back with the force of a hurricane. Judge Evelyn Reed stood behind her bench, her judicial robes flowing around her like armor forged from justice itself. The packed courtroom held its collective breath as she prepared to deliver what everyone knew would be a historic verdict. Officer Vincent O'Malley, she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of jurisprudence. Before I render judgment in this matter, I want to address not just you, but everyone in this courtroom, and everyone who will hear about what happened here today. She gestured to the gallery, packed with lawyers, court staff, reporters, and citizens drawn by the extraordinary proceedings. This morning began with a simple question. What happens when someone with a badge and a gun believes they are above the law? What happens when years of unchecked power, departmental protection, and systemic rot create a person who thinks they can assault a federal judge on the steps of her own courthouse and face no consequences? O'Malley sat slumped in his chair, his life and career crumbling around him in real time. "The answer, Officer O'Malley," Judge Reed declared, her eyes burning into him, "is standing before you right now." She picked up her gavel, the one engraved with the promise of truth. "For 15 years, you have terrorized this community. For 15 years, you have violated the constitutional rights of citizens whose only crime was existing while black or brown. For 15 years, you have made a complete and utter mockery of the badge you were sworn to honor." Her voice grew stronger, more passionate, fueled by a lifetime of fighting these battles. "But your greatest mistake, Officer O'Malley, wasn't any single act of brutality. It wasn't the lies or the cover-ups. Your greatest mistake was believing that the system would always protect you, no matter how far you went, no matter how many lives you destroyed." O'Malley finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and utterly defeated. "This morning, when you called me gutter trash and told me I belonged in a dumpster, when you slammed me against the wall of my own courthouse, when you handcuffed me and paraded me through these halls like a criminal, you thought you were asserting your dominance over just another powerless victim." Judge Reed leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing everyone in the packed courtroom to strain to hear her words. "But I was never powerless, Officer O'Malley, and neither were any of the hundreds of people you've brutalized over the years. The only difference is that today, justice finally had a witness who could fight back." She straightened to her full height, a towering figure of righteous fury. "Officer O'Malley, based on the irrefutable evidence presented in this courtroom, evidence that came from your own mouth, your own actions, your own camera, I find you guilty of assault in the 1st degree. A felony." The words hit the courtroom like thunder. "I find you guilty of assault on a judicial officer engaged in the performance of official duties, a federal felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence." O'Malley's attorney closed his eyes and put his head in his hands. "I find you guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, a federal felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison." With each pronouncement, O'Malley seemed to shrink further into his chair, becoming smaller and more pathetic. "And I find you guilty of perjury in the 1st degree for your false testimony given under oath in this very courtroom." Judge Reed paused, letting the weight of those convictions settle over the room. "But Officer O'Malley, this case was never really about you. You are simply a symptom of a much larger disease that has infected our justice system for far too long." She turned to address the packed gallery, her audience, the entire country. "For too long, we have allowed police officers to operate with impunity. For too long, we have dismissed complaints, ignored damning evidence, and paid out millions in taxpayer-funded settlements while allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. For too long, we have told victims of police brutality that their experiences don't matter, that their word doesn't count, that justice simply isn't for them." Her voice rose with the passion of 1,000 unheard voices. "But that ends today. Here, now. What happened in this courtroom today is proof that no one is above the law. Not police officers, not prosecutors, not politicians, and not even judges. No one." O'Malley suddenly broke down completely, his body shaking with racking sobs that echoed through the silent courtroom. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words choked with self-pity. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I never meant—" Judge Reed looked down at the broken man on the floor with something that might have been pity, had it not been burned away by years of seeing the wreckage men like him left behind. "Officer O'Malley, your apology is 15 years and 47 formal complaints too late. Your remorse is only appearing now because you finally got caught by someone with the power to hold you accountable." She lifted her gavel high above her head. "But here is what I want you to understand in your final moments as a free man. Every single person you brutalized over the years deserved the same justice I am delivering today. Every grandmother you called a slur, every teenager you planted drugs on, every doctor you arrested for living in the wrong neighborhood. They all deserved this moment. They all deserve to see you held accountable." The gavel hovered in the air, a pendulum of fate. Today, I am not just delivering justice for myself. I am delivering justice for every person whose complaints were dismissed as unsubstantiated. I'm delivering justice for every family that had to watch their loved one be brutalized while the system looked the other way. Her voice filled every corner of the courtroom. Officer O'Malley, you told me this morning to know my place. Well, let me tell you what my place is. My place is ensuring that bullies like you can never again hide behind a badge while destroying innocent lives. The gavel came down with a sound like the crack of creation. Officer Vincent O'Malley, you are hereby sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by law. You will serve 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. O'Malley collapsed completely, his sobs now the uncontrollable wails of a damned soul. Furthermore, Judge Reed continued, her voice ringing with finality, I am ordering a full federal investigation under my direct supervision into every case you have touched, every arrest you have made, and every complaint that has been filed against you. The victims you have silenced for 15 years will finally have their day in court. She set down her gavel and looked out over the packed courtroom, her gaze both a warning and a promise. Let this be a message to every police officer, every prosecutor, every official who thinks they can abuse their power without consequences. Justice may be blind, but she sees everything, and eventually she comes for everyone. The courtroom erupted in spontaneous, thunderous applause that lasted for 5 full minutes. Justice, for once, had been served. 6 months later, the ripple effects of that historic morning continued to transform Charleston's entire justice system. Officer Vincent O'Malley was serving his 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal prison, where his fellow inmates, having learned of his crimes through extensive news coverage, made his life a living hell. His badge, his pension, his freedom. All gone. The man who once terrorized a community now spent his days in protective custody, finally understanding what it truly felt like to be powerless. But O'Malley's downfall was just the beginning. The federal investigation Judge Reed ordered uncovered a web of corruption that reached deep into the police department's command structure. 12 other officers were terminated. 4 supervisors, including the chief, were criminally charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The entire department was placed under a federal consent decree, forcing radical top-to-bottom reform. Chief Judge Diane Holloway established new protocols requiring automatic federal review of any case involving allegations of police misconduct. Body cameras became mandatory for all officers, with tamper-proof cloud-based systems that could never be malfunctioned away again. Most importantly, the 432 cases O'Malley had tainted were reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted defendants were exonerated and released from prison, walking into the arms of weeping family members. Hundreds more had their charges dropped or their sentences reduced. The city of Charleston paid out an additional $8.7 million in compensation to O'Malley's victims, money that came directly from the police department's bloated budget. Judge Reed herself became a national symbol of judicial integrity and courage. She was invited to speak at law schools and conferences across the country, sharing the story of how one moment of violence revealed decades of systemic abuse. Her message was always the same. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice delivered is justice for all. The J. Waddy's Waring Judicial Center, where it all happened, was officially renamed the Judge Evelyn M. Reed Federal Courthouse in her honor. A bronze plaque near the entrance now commemorates the morning that changed everything, with a simple inscription. Here, justice finally found its voice. But perhaps the most powerful change was in the community itself. Citizens who had spent years terrified of reporting police misconduct began coming forward, their voices finally being heard. Community oversight boards with real power were established. Police training programs were completely overhauled, with Judge Reed personally designing new curricula on constitutional rights, de-escalation, and unconscious bias. The young law clerk, Sarah, who had witnessed the proceedings that day, was so inspired by Judge Reed's courage that she dedicated her career to civil rights law. She now works for the ACLU, fighting similar battles in courtrooms across the nation. Deputies Cardenas and Miller, the officers who had supported O'Malley's lies, were terminated and faced federal charges. Their recorded laughter while watching a federal judge be brutalized became evidence in a case study taught at police academies nationwide as a stark example of institutional corruption and the blue wall of silence. The video of Judge Reed delivering her verdict became one of the most watched courtroom clips in internet history, viewed over 50 million times. Comments poured in from around the world, from people who had experienced similar injustices but had never seen accountability delivered so completely, so publicly, so perfectly. Today, Vinnie O'Malley sits in his prison cell, probably thinking about the moment he chose to assault a woman because he thought she was powerless. He thought he knew his place in the world. He thought he knew hers. He was wrong about both. Because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears judicial robes. Sometimes justice carries a gavel. And sometimes, when the moment is right, justice hits back. Never underestimate the power of standing up to bullies. Share this story if you believe everyone deserves justice, regardless of who they are or what they look like. Hit that like button if you want to see more stories of courage triumphing over corruption. And please subscribe, because stories like this happen every day, and we all deserve to see the moment the tables are turned. Your voice matters. Your story could be next. Remember, the truth always finds a way.